the honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, there are two ways to go broke. First gradually and then suddenly. Canada is not only going broke, it is broken. In the battle of the soul of Canada, we are confronted by two ideologies. That of the Liberal and NDP socialism, spending beyond reproach, high crime rates, divide and division, high taxation, an unproductive economy, a monopoly economy where housing and food have become unaffordable for so many. On the other side lies the vision of a common-sense conservative economy where government is leaner, taxes are lower, paychecks are bigger, and competition thrives. It's a vision where we prioritize toughest on crime to ensure equal opportunity for all that call Canada home. You see, the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. After this government has spent $350 billion in deficit spending outside of COVID relief programs, yes, $350 billion, this budget is set to spend another $50 billion while raising taxes and projected to spend $60 billion next year. That's $460 billion in deficit spending since 2015 for bigger government and more social programs where the results have been Canadians who are worse off. After 9 years, too many young Canadians feel as though the deck is stacked against them. They get a good job, they work hard, but far too often the reward of a secure, prosperous, comfortable middle class remains out of reach for them. After 9 years, we have seniors who have been priced out of their homes and going to the food bank. Their pensions that once made sense and their fixed incomes that promised a comfortable life are now not enough to cover the basic needs. After 9 years of Liberal governance, too many Canadians feel disheartened, seeing their aspirations to a secure, prosperous life slipping away. They see the effects of big government, suffocating regulations, and reckless spending. And it's not fair, Mr. Speaker, it's anything but fair. This generational unjustness has 62% of Canadians 18 to 34 giving up on owning a home. That number is 73% for those that are 35 to 54. Taxes are going up more than $20 billion. The GST now only covers debt payment interest. It's now the minimum payment. It should be probably called the DST, the debt service charge, only $50 billion a year. Grocery prices have risen to a point where most Canadians now buy less food when food banks are recording record numbers. Crime is at an all-time high. There's a 300% increase in car theft in Toronto alone. Child poverty is on the rise in Canada, with 1 in 5 children facing challenges. 1 in 5 children in a G7 nation. More and more Canadians are finding out they can't even get a doctor, and more visits to the ER result in hours after hours of wait times. The carbon tax has gone up 23% this year alone, raising the price of groceries, heat and gas, and a bureaucracy that's growing with it. Over 500 employees just to collect a carbon tax. Meanwhile, our productivity, doing more with what we've got, is at all-time low as we lack skilled trades, education for our youth, and business investment. There's going to be an increase in personal taxes, means that we're losing companies in Canada to the U.S. who have lower personal tax coupled with the fact that they could also buy a home in the U.S. for half the cost of a home in Canada. Foreign and domestic investors are leaving Canada at record rates. Innovators and doctors say this budget will drive them out of the country. Countries cry out for Canadian LNG, and this Prime Minister says the increased jobs and government ready aren't worth it. Poland, Japan, Germany have all been turned down for liquefied natural gas by this Prime Minister because he says there is no business case. Meanwhile, the U.S. has opened hundreds of wells and provided billions to their economy. Our monopoly problem means that Canadians are paying the highest rates in the world for cell phones, for airlines, for banking, and for groceries. All worse, well, the state says they've lowered them by half. Can you believe this? The Prime Minister said he lowered cell phone bills by Canadians in half when Canadians know the real answer is that bills have never been higher. And to top it off, high inflation because of high interest rates are driving the cost for Canadians higher based on a very simple fact. The government is spending way more than it is taking in. This isn't a budget about Canadian fairness. It's a socialist political maneuver described as fiscal responsibility with generational unfairness, ensuring that our next generation will inherit the national debt. Despite $460 billion in deficit spending over and above COVID-19 programs, remember, just more government. Canadians are getting less and paying more and being taxed to death for it. Canadians who pay taxes on every dollar earned, every dollar they spend, every dollar they inherit, every dollar invested, every dollar saved, every dollar in property tax are tired of seeing their hard-earned money wasted on inefficient government programs and bureaucracy. They deserve a government that respects their efforts and works tirelessly to ensure their prosperity and well-being. Despite $460 billion in deficits, we have no more doctors or hospital beds, no more affordable renter homes, no better prices at the grocery store for cell phones or grocery or banks. We have no bigger paychecks, and we have more taxes. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we need a government that's going to look after Canadians. That's a Conservative government. I look forward to continuing my speech right after the break.
So when the honourable member returns, he'll have 4 minutes left in his speech.
Madam Speaker, before I begin, do you know how much time I have left? 35 minutes. Fantastic.
Oh, sorry, the honourable member had 4 minutes left to debate.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to get back to debate. Of course, I was debating about what is the battle for the soul of Canada, and a battle between the left and the NDP and Liberal socialism, the spending upon approach, the high crime rates, divide and division, high taxation, and unproductive economy, and monopolistic economy, and the other side of the vision for a common-sense Conservative economy, where government is leaner, taxes are lower, paychecks are better, and competition thrives. And of course, we talk also about democracy, where democracy works when there's a public trust and good fiscal stewardship. Of course, we're trying to make the lives of Canadians even better. You know, Canadians enjoyed a good life in the middle class 9 years ago. But Canadians young and old now see the real truth after 9 years. They see now a government, instead of working hard for the middle class and those looking to join it, they're shutting the door to the middle class and those very Canadians they promised help for 9 years ago. And to top it all off, Madam Speaker, we have a monopoly problem. And more pain where people are paying higher fees for airlines, groceries, banking, and cell phones. This government approved mere months ago the merger of RBC buying HSBC, the #1 bank, buying the #7 bank. And you can already see the costs of mergers and acquisitions to those Canadians and to all Canadians across Canada. The 5-year variable for HSBC before the merger was 6.4%. And now, after the merger, just today, that variable rate is at 7.2% under RBC, meaning if those mortgage holders had a $500,000 mortgage, which is pretty low for Canada, they're now paying over $333 a month. The monopoly problem means that we have less competition. It means that Canadians are paying higher rates. When we look at open banking as a solution for our problem with banking, we don't get the legislation promised out of this budget. Just like a caterpillar, Madam Speaker, it says coming soon. But the reality is this legislation will bring savings to Canadians. In the UK, it brought $400 per family when open banking was introduced. And yet this legislation is kicked down the road once again, 6 years after this government promised to introduce that legislation. Another one called Real-Time Rail that would bring modern payments, make payments faster between Canadians, has been delayed, deferred, postponed. No new announcements on grocery prices. It says we've done enough with C-59. Of course, Canadians have the highest grocery prices in a whole generation and are buying less food. And we have false statements about halving phone bills. The Prime Minister said he halved phone bills. Madam Speaker, Canadians are paying more, and specifically more for data, as Canadians consume more data, especially for doorbell cams, as they see increases of auto theft and they have to monitor their cars. Canadians are using data. Companies, of course, are profiting from it. Canadians instead are broke because capitalism without competition isn't capitalism, where prices are freely negotiated. We don't have a competition in this monopoly-centered Canada, and what's worse, the budget aims to tax those who stay. Madam Speaker, Canadians and Canada are broke, but it doesn't have to be that way. The state has no money other than the money people earn themselves. If the state wants to spend more, it is only by borrowing from your savings or taxing you more. In contrast, Conservatives champion the principles of individual responsibility and limited government, greater revenues and growth. We have a dollar for dollar rule. For every dollar we spend, we must find a dollar in savings, just like a family does. As Canadians, we must have the conviction to embrace the principles of that conservatism, to reject the false promises of Liberal and NDP socialism, and to defend the values of freedom, opportunity, and prosperity. Madam Speaker, we're going to fix the budget, build the homes, axe the tax, and we're going to make sure we bring Canadians home a capitalist government that brings home their paycheck and brings back the middle class. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary at the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, do the contrast. I'm on game for that, He says they're a capitalistic government. Do you know, in last year, Canada was ranked number 1 in the G7 in terms of direct foreign investment to Canada. It was ranked number 3 in the world, Madam Speaker. I would suggest to you that those that are investing, those countries abroad and those people abroad realize that Canada is a good place to invest. The facts demonstrate that from last year. So how is it, and I would suggest to you, it's in good part because of things like the number of trade agreements that we have signed off on. And that is important. No government has signed off on more free trade agreements than this government. That is a fact. My question to the member opposite is, why did he vote against the Canada-Ukraine trade agreement?
I want to remind members that when the honourable member was making his speech, nobody was interrupting him. And if those members who are speaking out of turn are trying to answer the question, they should ask to be part of the debate and want to be recognized when I call for resuming debate instead of trying to take part in the debate when they're not supposed to. The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Madam Speaker, there's a lot of questions there, but when we look at trade agreements, the government just lost a trade agreement with the UK, couldn't get that signed. The EU agreement was signed because of the work done by the previous Conservative government to get that rolling. When we talk about foreign direct investment, of course there's records when the government has spent $50 billion of its own money to create subsidies for those companies to come in. But when we look at growth rates for the OECD, Canada is dead last, with an economy right now is performing 5 times less growth than the U.S. economy, and that growth is buoyed by what? Public spending, which is 5 times any other spending by the private sector. Madam Speaker, it's because of government spending that's driving inflation, high interest rates, but more the higher cost of living, public spending, and it's hurting Canadians. We need to change that.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Speaker, and to the honourable colleague, wonder if he'd like to agree that spending $34 billion, billion being 1,000 million, every billion is 1,000 million, so $34,000 million to build the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which the private sector had decided was not profitable and they weren't going to pursue it. Would the honourable member like to comment on that waste of public funds?
The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Madam Speaker, it was a waste of public funds, just the fact that it cost that much to do, when the private sector probably could have done it for about 1/5 that, or 10% on the dollar of that. So yes, of course, everything this Liberal government has touched has been more expensive. But Madam Speaker, when we talk about oil and gas in the sector in Canada, which is still very important, we talk about LNG. We had Poland this week just asking, screaming for LNG to help offset the Russian gas that they're buying. And I was in Germany last year with the industry minister, and Germany was screaming for that gas. The Green Party in Germany was asking for LNG because they said it's the way that they're going to cut their emissions and not rely on coal, which they're having to build. We can do that in Canada. Let's support LNG. Let's support our oil and gas industry. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé, a brief question. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to get my colleague's opinion. Here in the Bloc Québécois, we've asked for funds to be reimbursed to Quebec for welcoming asylum seekers. That's about $900 million. The Conservative Party is saying that it would interfere less with Quebec and provincial jurisdiction. Does my colleague agree? Does he think that this should have been in the budget? Giving Quebec the money appropriately that was spent by Quebec for federal areas of jurisdiction on asylum seekers.
Has 1 minute to respond.
Real quickly, no, we don't think we should be interfering in provincial politics. But the second part of this, when we look at what's coming into Canada, I'm going to give one stat. You know, we had 1.3 million immigrants to Canada last year. And we need immigration. I need immigration big time in Bay of Quinte. But and when you relate that to how many people that is, the U.S. had 3.3 million migrants last year. If we had the 1.3 contributed to the U.S., that'd be equivalent to 11 million migrants in the U.S. It's massive. And what happened, the one stat from that, when we look at 1.3 million Canadians, we only brought 4,300 home builders in this country. No wonder we can't build homes. We don't have the people. We have to ensure we work with the provinces to get the people we need to those provinces. Number one, to build homes, provide workers, and that's going to help productivity in this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.